I did not wash under my foreskin for the first 15 years. This happened around 6 years ago when I was in ninth grade. I grew up not knowing anything about my weenie or how to clean it. My parents never taught me anything about genitals. I apparently never asked, I only knew where the pee came out. So one day in ninth grade biology, our teacher covered the male reproductive system. She reached a point where she mentioned that for uncircumcised males, the foreskin is supposed to retract over the head of the rod. I was pretty shocked because that's certainly not how mine worked. By that time, I was a daily meat beater, and my foreskin could barely go back enough for me to see the entrance of the urethra. So armed with my new knowledge about how my weenie was supposed to work, I went home, and a few Google searches led me to discover that I had a severe phimosis. So being the pragmatic young buck I am, I also Googled how to fix it. There were two options, either tell my parents and have them take me to a doctor for surgery or do stretching exercises. Not wanting to tell any of this to my parents or have someone come near my willy with a scalpel, I opted for the latter option. I got some baby oil, the only lube available at the time besides my mom's bottle of expensive extra virgin olive oil, and went to work. After about 4 hours of stretching, I finally started making some progress. I could see a slightly bigger area now, not just the opening of the urethra like before. Everything was going great except for one thing. From the underside of my foreskin came the most pungent, musty, cheesy disgusting smell I've ever had the displeasure of smelling, even to this day. It dawned on me that my willy had truly not been cleaned in my entire life up to that point. I kept stretching over the course of a few days, and I started to notice a thick, gooey greenish-brown sludge seeping from under the foreskin as I stretched. Some quick Googling taught me that this was smegma, also known as weenie cheese. I cleaned it off whenever it seeped out during my stretching exercises. As much as it disgusted me, everything was still going fine. That was about to change real effing fast. So this was about 10 days into my stretching, and I'd gotten my foreskin about to the halfway mark. I was getting very excited to finally have a normal full, functioning frick stick, so I got very impatient and decided I'd try to force it back. That day, I lubed and got to work. I pulled it back as far as it would go and pulled it some more. I pulled it till I couldn't bear the pain anymore. I did this repeatedly for around 3 hours until I somehow managed to pull it almost to where it was almost over the entirety of the head of my little guy. I got way too excited, and despite the pain, I gave it one big yank, and I felt the foreskin pop over the back of the glands. It hurt like hell, but I was so relieved that I didn't care. I opened my eyes, and my heart skipped several beats. The entire lower half of the head of my rod, down to the area behind it, was caked with thick brown/green smegma. That was now mixing with the blood that seemed out of where I tore the top part of my foreskin when I yanked it over the glands. I freaked and squeezed the area to stop the bleeding, which only worsened the pain. It eventually stopped, and I had to chip away at the smegma caked onto my willy. I eventually got it all off after half an hour of scrubbing. I was still hurting, but I was finally done. I got the foreskin all the way back over the head of my willy. I thought that was it. I tried rolling it back over the head, but it wouldn't budge, so I just left it. I completely ignored that forcing the foreskin back would constrict all the blood flow to the head of my pee-pee. You know how a balloon looks when you fill it with water and tie it? That's how my pee-pee looked. I went to bed, went to school the next day in severe pain, and acted like everything was fine. I was still in major pain when I got home, so I decided to check on it. I undressed in the shower and looked down at it. The first thing I saw was the blisters. 2 huge brown pus-filled blisters, one on the right side and the other on the underside of the glands. The next thing I noticed was that my weenie was now seemingly turning some shade of white. I'm a black guy. I realized that if I didn't find a way to get my foreskin back over my glands, it would probably shrivel up and fall off. I lubed up again and began forcing my foreskin back over the glands. This was made even more difficult because of the 2 big blisters in the way. I kept trying to force it back over, and I put too much pressure on one of the blisters, and it broke, causing pus to leak out all over my wiener and fingers. My stick was on fire at this point, and I was holding back tears, but I kept pushing until I felt it pop back over the glands. Judging from the liquid that seeped out afterward and the extra jolt of pain I felt, I guess the second blister popped too. Once again, I left it and effing went to bed. I checked 3 days later, and my meat returned to its original color. I rolled back the foreskin again and cleaned where the blisters were, and within 3 weeks, I was pretty much okay. My foreskin was still tight, and I think constricting my glands with the opening of my foreskin for a whole day probably made me lose a tiny bit of sensation down there. Still, hey, at least my weenie is clean. Also, please teach your kids about their bodies for the love of God. Even if they aren't as stupid as I was, don't take that risk.